going to call us to order at 6:01. I'm just let you know we have a couple changes to the agenda tonight. We need to table item 4F. That's warning of the merger vote, and when we the reason for that is we need to wait a little longer because we cannot make we can't do the warning with Lincoln on, and we can't do the warning with Lincoln off. We have to off the warning. The warning has our wordings about Lincoln because they're advisory, so we can't do it until they decide what they're doing. So we're just going to pause on that. We'll have to do. We have a timeline when we have to get it done, and that'll be at one of our September meetings
or special early October.
Right. So we have to wait till the sort of the last minute to decide that. So that's why I'm gonna ask you to table it when we get to it, and then we need to rearrange under board management and governance. J and K, move those up and move H and I down, just for flow of the meeting. Okay. All right. So at this time, is there any public comment? Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Is that okay? Yes. No, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good.
That's better.
That's just great. We're good. Thank you.
Yes. Seeing
We
any,
don't look too dark on the screen, I don't think so.
I'm not seeing any public comment. All right, so we move down to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? This. All right, is there a second?
Krista?
All right, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye or give a thumbs up online.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes. All right, moving down to executive limitations monitoring, we have an update on the financial report. And there was a new one sent out under separate cover. So did you all get the separate email with the updated one? Any questions?
Yeah, but I didn't have time to look at
That was the
it. Is
plan.
that now linked in, that's the correct linked document in the agenda now?
I'm not sure if it is or if it will be linked
In the
correctly in the
minutes.
minutes,
In the
right?
minutes.
Yeah, it's
'cause we
not
can't-
correct, it's not in the correctly linked. in the
Right,
agenda.
once the agenda is warned, we can't change the links because it's sort of that frozen in that picture.
Okay.
So it will be in the minutes.
You can certainly, upon reviewing it, if you have questions, you can send those to Floyd and
Yeah.
we can get those
I
answers.
I had a moment to review the wrong.
So to state the obvious, July 1, we're now.
In the 2022-23 fiscal year, yes. Yep.
Right, then we'll move, our next update is on the lobby and the bathrooms.
And for that update, we're thinking, since we're right here and you walk through part of the construction zone, why not just get up and go for a walk and see what's going on? And to help with that, Shannon Warden is here to lead the tour.
So where we pause the video and we'll be back.
Can we take the video with us?
We cannot carry the owl with us, so no. We're not set up for that.
What if I log on?
Might be able to
Yeah,
take
if somebody can log on to their Zoom with their phone and
I can do that.
Yep.
All right.
In which case I'll leave this recording then. It may just be a little box that is Krista's phone, but it should pull yours up as the one speaking. So maybe what I'll do is mute the owl.
And we're adding where all the bathrooms are gender neutral or single use bathrooms as well, for kids who want a little additional privacy. So kind of what you see on one side is what you see on the other. So we'll just kind of go this way. This will be a single use. And you can walk in, you'll see, got a little bit smaller. We'll still have a handicap accessible stall. The male bathrooms are gonna have partitions, which will be very good. I've had a lot of requests for those. So you're welcome to go in and if you want to see. Great, so here you'll see a bunch of things, new door frames. Wall, I noticed that this ceiling is gray color, they needed to fireproof the wooden slats somehow. And so we opted for a color, which some flaws. Instead of keep rocking everything or move away from the look of the design with the wooden slats. We're adding a door to the bottom and the top of this stairwell. And the reason for that is for fire code, so that if somebody needed to be in there for X amount of time, they would be protected from the fire for a period of time. Lots of new sheetrock. So there's a little bit of work that's going to go on in the office, some floors and things, and just like a little piece for interest, but everything has been torn down for access to all the infrastructure and the wiring and everything. So. So what you see here is the new extended balcony that goes all the way around and works out the front. The media wall will be here with some seating. It started to pick out yesterday. Over there will be some shelves and storage for after events, with concession technique, and musical performances. And there'll be what we call a Venus bar, a counter with plugins and tools for people to work at that's on wheels. So not in the middle. This whole section here will be the airlocks for security. Buzzed in where that pool is, there'll be a transaction window where Laura, somebody will ask what it is you need, and you'll either get let into the office or let into the building based on.
Essentially a glass wall dropping down from that metal height.
Yeah.
And then turning the corner back to where that brick wall juts out.
And that little nook will be another seating area with some counters.
Left of that wall. Part of into.
It's in the middle.
Exterior door.
And there'll be, so a lot of our, what they call hand lights in the ceiling are staying the same, but they are installing more chandelier type lights that light up and light down to make the space bright. So here we have the infamous drain, of course, the infamous drain. Display cases for trophies, student work, plaques, things like that will be displayed here. Bathrooms are also under renovation and are kind of a lower priority than the larger ones right now. So they're not as far done, but we will go up the back stairs. So these are bathrooms that used to be larger, and we're making them a little bit smaller to have a gender neutral bathroom on both sides for whomever, mainly thinking about the students. This is the faculty room that you've probably never been in. We had to take some of the space for the bathrooms and kind of took down some walls and are going to make this a more usable space for teachers to actually be able to work or have lunch in kind of a calm, quiet space. So giving that a little facelift, since it all had to be changed anyway. This is the tile that will be in all the bathrooms, the floor and the wall. So from the paint down will be tile. With one wall, we'll have a featured tile wall where it's like a herringbone pattern and it's like a gradient of grays. This is sticky glue, so be careful. So these are the Flotex tiles that'll be up here and downstairs and go around the whole lobby. This part's really exciting. We have two viewing windows into the gym.
Yeah, this is super cool.
So we were thinking maybe like VIP seating for basketball games, bird's eye view. Absolutely. Please watch your step. Out here, there's a lot of debris. So this is the new catwalk in the new lobby. Go ahead. You're gonna go
I'm sorry.
first.
Okay.
I call this the vantage point of the mountains that no one has ever had before. Being on the second floor, right out front with big, beautiful windows. And these will be, the two end sections will be study nooks that the kids are picking out furniture for. And then they wanted the center one to be more comfortable, like living room furniture to sit with their books, be able to charge and be able to look out at the mountains. And this, there's a lot more debris over there. This goes all the way around and there'll be extra lighting, which hangs to artwork and things around this. piece here where you see the wood is actually a clear glass that on the bottom, not really etched, it's really more of a sticker, but will have a little opacity to it and it will be in a pattern of the mountain ranges.
Specifically that mountain.
That's the idea. It's as close to that as we could get.
And that's the entrance to the catwalk there,
That
or
whole thing will be open.
that's all
So
open?
that's
Great.
just a temporary wall, so that'll be open, so there'll be seating on the other side to kind of where the light is in front of that wall.
Great.
So that's just while they're working for safety here.
School starts.
Yeah. Tomorrow for staff.
T-5.
This is when we remind ourselves, Kevin, that it will all be worth it when it's done.
It'll all be worth it.
It's gonna be pretty
I've seen
amazing.
worse.
Yeah. I bet you have.
It'll be okay. All right, we'll get back on Monday. Very free air conditioning.
Yeah.
Kind of like the al fresco.
Shannon, are we seeing more or should I stop? Or well, I guess we don't want to stop because, okay. Are there two of these windows? So this one and then that one. Yes. Love that.
Oh, and I was saying, like, I can't believe the ceiling was that high. It's coming down on you.
They're geeking out. They're geeking out.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so this carpet will continue around. Thank you. I don't know what they do since it's and this is the other set of bathrooms, mirrors with downstairs, just some different colors. These are a little bit further along, and why? Well, they were coming along. But the priority is on the upstairs bathrooms right now. Since we have some single stall bathrooms downstairs. So there'll be two gender neutral here, just like downstairs. And brand new bathroom. Almost every bathroom. Men's and women's. All of them did except the nurse's office and the 3 single stalls down there, and the locker rooms were done 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
And the 3 single stalls are
They're pretty new.
relatively new compared to the rest of the building.
Yeah. And that's over on the new end of the building, lower? Yes, on the west side, at the very end.
Answer any questions. Any questions? Shannon? Or tour guide? Kevin?
So I've got a tangential question, of course. I've been hearing, with this lobby renovation, I've been hearing yipping about pass-through classrooms or walk-through classrooms or whatever the term is, you have to walk through one first time to get to the next one, is that? So that, at one point, that was identified as a big issue. I don't know how they're being used, or if it's a big issue, or something happened in the past that seems to be a big issue, but it's not forgotten that we've got that situation going on in the lobby.
Yes, we do have pass-through classrooms. That's mostly the second floor upstairs in the math wing, where it's one classroom is inside, kind of locked in, and then an outer classroom. But you'll recall that really the premise for the lobby project was for safety and security. Because we were very unsecure the way it was with the door and the office setup and how easy it was for people to pass through. So the landlocked classes are definitely not forgotten.
So with all the, well, not with all the, with a reduced student population, are those still have to be used in that configuration?
Yes, even though our population has gone down over time, we have been able to maintain programming. So there are still as many classes that are happening throughout the day that require classroom space. And it's not have 4 kids in them, and maybe 18.
And I don't remember the details of it, but the work involved in rearranging where all those classrooms are located, it was a pretty extensive work. And part of the strategy in recent years has been, where can we make improvements in the building that don't necessarily drive the larger context of work? So in all of the iterations, the lobby was the lobby. So renovating the lobby doesn't impact future discussions about where things are located. Likewise, the bathrooms weren't really getting moved, so updating the bathrooms was something we could do. So we're starting to run out of projects that don't start to really drive the bigger picture, and we'll want to be thinking more about future projects and their impact on any future bond or more significant renovation of the building. So we'll just want to make those in the context of the larger scale.
So a couple of thoughts is that room, the flood room, wherever that's kind of like in that direction where you took 2 classrooms at grade 1. That's just option or something like that. And then I guess the other thing is, if this merger is successful, and there's some consolidation, high school and junior high, does that relieve some of the pressure here?
Yeah, I don't recall what the enrollments would be in that 6.8 and 9.12 version. But yeah, if the enrollment changes, then the space needs may change. But we may also be in a similar situation what Shana was talking about, depending on the breadth of programming that we offer. Because it really is the space utilization is as much about what programs we choose to offer as much as it is how many kids we have. That's, they're obviously both are factors.
And we tried to provide support services, so classrooms, teachers of special education and interventionists, that they have a classroom and not a tiny little space or kind of a office space to work with kids, that there's room and walls to put things on, things like that. So that takes up space as well. So we maxed out in terms of spaces that we utilize here.
Yeah, it's sort of those, if you build it, then you'll use it, right? So no sense in not utilizing space, because we're still going to have to eat it. You still have to have electricity, et cetera. So maximizing the space that you have, even though the number of students in the rooms will be less than what it has the capacity for. And we've seen the same in elementary schools. You don't walk around elementary schools that are operating at 50-something% capacity and see lots of rooms with nothing going on. The rooms are being utilized in a variety of ways, even though there are a lot fewer students.
I had a couple questions. Do we know what the status is in the bathrooms?
In terms of when they'll be finished?
When they'll be finished and what the contingency plan is?
So we are hoping that the 2 gang bathrooms and gender neutral bathrooms upstairs, either the ones by the faculty room or kind of above us, will be done in the next couple of weeks. Just finishing waiting for the remaining fixtures to come in and counters and doors to finish, which is kind of in the slow part of getting people to come in and lay the tile in the bathrooms. Work has been done, the plumbing and all of that. Those walls were stripped down, and then most of the bathrooms, the floor was dug up, like dirt, boulders, places, so they've come a long way from where they were. So I'm hoping for additional bathrooms by the second week of September, and the rest probably the end of September. So we have 20 portalets coming that have sinks in them, and 10 will be located on the south end of the building and 10 on the north end. And then we have the single-use bathrooms in the middle school wing and the nurse's office bathroom until we get there.
And I was just wondering, are you going to communicate to families before school starts? Awesome.
Yes, waiting for our lobby update meeting on Thursday so that I can have some firmer dates.
This is my third question, so should I just go for it? Or you want to say, okay. While you're doing this renovation, is there a way to spruce up the elevator at all? I mean, I know that's on the list of bigger things, but
Just had that conversation yesterday while I rode in the elevator.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that it at least needs new paint.
yes.
And I think the carpeting should come up and put in the flow text that we're putting in out here, which is
Awesome. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking that what we just videoed would be really cool to show people, or some version of that. You know, like you said, the kids were just,
they were.
I mean, it's going to be awesome. And this construction stuff is,
And I've been.
everybody
trying to-
knows this is happening everywhere,
Yeah,
but the vision and what you can see with what we've seen today. I mean, if there's a way to share that with folks, I think that
yes,
is
and
really
we've
exciting.
been trying to get as many pictures along
Yeah.
the way, like from demolition,
Yeah,
kind of all the way through,
Oh,
so
good.
that we can show folks the progression from start to finish.
Great. Well, thank you for taking the time and absolutely coming and giving us a tour. So we'll move down to board management and governance. So the first item is the discussion of the work plan, and that was attached to the agenda. Everybody had a chance to take a look? Any comments, questions, thoughts? Now's the time. Remember, it's outlined in our policy that we accept this by our September meeting, so. That came back so quickly. Good stuff.
yeah, so I was just wondering where the couple of policies that we talked about, maybe looking at the language, where that, before we get to the point of needing to receive a report, where are those in there? Is that is there a place in that work plan to put down that we want to review that language?
I don't think that is in this version of the work plan, so we would want to add that as a task. in
So-
whichever month makes sense.
Well, maybe, do we want to do it before the monitoring report, or do we want to set like quarterly, or just carve out a space, or, you know, once a year or twice a year to review it?
Which one?
And then it wouldn't matter, you could just review whatever, you know, you have that set time in the agenda and be able to review any policies that we had questions or concerns about.
It's really, there's a timing component to it, right? So if we set that, say, twice a year date, any policies that are going to have a monitoring report due shortly after that review date, it perhaps is going to be unreasonable to expect a turnaround to write the monitoring report based on a new language. And some can be adapted pretty quickly and others not so much. For example, if we change the ends at this meeting, it wouldn't be reasonable to have a monitoring report in October that reflects that change. Some others, that's sort of an extreme example, but there are others that would be challenging to turn around quickly. So I think that the reason the initial intent was if after hearing a monitoring report, there's something about the policy that doesn't work well, to change that policy language in the meeting that follows the monitoring report, then you have the whole year before that monitoring report is due again, and a whole year to incorporate whatever policy language changes. So as we think about what dates to select, we'll just want to be thoughtful about making sure there's enough time to adapt the report to the new language.
What's the minimum amount of time you would need?
It's
Like,
different
so-
for different policies.
So
That's
one of the
how-
ones that I had brought up was 2.6 asset protection. And that one was an interest in looking at the language around accessibility and, working toward all buildings being, I forget what the words were that,
Right.
but we punted that one. And so I think that comes up again on November 15th, according to this.
Well, and some of it too is how much do you want the policy to drive action that you're then reporting out on? I mean, that's the whole intent, right? The intent in policy isn't necessarily just to drive a monitoring report. Policy language drives the way the organization behaves. So if we change the rules of the game in the middle of the season, that's complicated. I think that's the other benefit of immediately following a monitoring report. That's when we change the policy. And then that policy language not only drives the monitoring report, but drives how the organization behaves. And so the ideal would be if we're changing language about accessibility, we're saying there's a new policy language that speaks to accessibility. And from that point forward, the behavior of the organization should reflect that policy language. And then at the end of the year of operating under that new language, we want to hear how did that year go. If we change the language around accessibility in that policy now, and then wanted a report in November on that, in terms of how it drives the way the organization behaves, they would only have a couple of months to report out against. Otherwise, we're just reporting out on how we behaved prior to this language change for most of it, which may or may not reflect what the policy wants us to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess I wish I'd known we should have changed it the next month after. And I appreciate what you're saying. I would lean toward us striving to make changes and then recognize we might not be, I'd rather be partially or non-compliant. Speaking from personal experience, we're not there yet with how we look at our facilities. And each project that comes up, it comes up again and again. And so I would rather strive for that now, knowing it might take a while to get there, than wait for the right time.
I think as long as that caveat was understood, then I think that's reasonable.
I would offer that there needs to be essentially a start date. So if you change the policy 6-8 months into the review year, if you will, there needs to be an overt understanding that it will to affect until the next review year or something. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, the NSPAW is a perfect example. We've contrived this policy that's unattainable, and I don't think we want to continue that any more than we have to. But it's short cycle. This should be acknowledged as to what the start date or the review period is going to be. Do this, what you're talking about now, start until November as opposed to it starts now and we've got the social projects too.
So, Don, this calendar work plan sort of lays out our one meeting. We talked about two potentially. And doesn't necessarily describe what we want to try to achieve with the second meeting. I think one of the ideas we had at the last meeting was maybe we concentrate on a topic. If we're not going to, if there's no impetus in the group to create subcommittees, if the board is going to take on the responsibility of looking closer than we have been at things like finance and policy governance. It's probably a couple other parking lot things we have. School choice, for instance, whatever, just if we wanted to deep dive into something as a board rather than forming subcommittees, if that was people's choice, we want to develop that plan here as well.
That's a good question, because this really addresses our regular business meetings of
Yes.
this stuff. So, I mean,
Which we're pretty familiar with. We understand how to operate it for the most part. I mean, there's obviously people that haven't done a lot of it, but some of the harder stuff to do and to get traction on is stuff that's not on this.
we can certainly, I think, make adjustments as a, as long as everybody has a flexible mindset that as we work through it, we might decide like, okay, this is what we like, how we laid it out is not gonna work, we need to adjust. And
Some of it, I think, is also gaining more clarity as the second meeting evolves, right? So last year, the second meeting was added specifically for discussions around facilities because it was such a time-consuming topic. So it was more or less specifically dedicated to that topic. You had your business meeting and you had your sort of facilities meeting. That has sort of evolved a little bit in the conversation at the retreat for this, the purpose of the second meeting now to dig into some of the, like a broader range of topics. Which currently is very broad. I don't think we really zeroed in on really what would those topics be, which seems like an important step to be able to map this out. And we can, I mean, from the conversation, we can take a stab at mapping out some of those topics. I mean, I think about, we could go as concrete as one of the meetings, we're going to dig deep into what's happening with regards to literacy in the strategic plan, math in the strategic plan, SEL in the strategic plan. We can talk about MTSS as a whole, the system, and have the board understand at a deeper level how that works and some of the systems in place. So that's an idea of a few things that we could map out.
I think ends in general.
Right. Those are all related
Was
to the
what came out of the last meeting that we should be looking more often at ends. How do we readjust the expectations of the ends? How do we set some more achievable measuring goals? What's better evidence if we want better evidence? So that's a great topic for a second meeting. We got almost to the point of a policy governance investigation group last year, but it never coalesced and it never went in. It sort of went on the parking lot and stayed there. So I think even a meeting just to talk about how we want to deal with policy. Are we just going to review it during the schedule and it's only going to be analyzed during the schedule, or is there going to be a group that maybe goes and checks policy against what's currently on the VSBA website, sees if it's up to date, and sort of those sort of things. You know, is there somebody sort of housekeeping policy aside from just one person a month looking at policy? That's just a group discussion we can have in more depth at a second meeting. We don't necessarily even have a policy on how we're dealing with our policies. That's one thing I noticed when Don, you sort of asked Sandy and I to look at that last year. You know, the VSBA has a policy on how to inform and modify your policies. And couldn't really put my finger on that in our policies. Mainly because most other boards have a policy governance committee, and that's their charge, and so there's a policy on how they operate. Anyway, I think obviously we're not going to be able to flush out the entire second agenda tonight, but it might be a good thing for folks to bring to the next meeting ideas. I mean, I noticed in the parking lot tab here, there's nothing in it, but I know we have a lot of parking lot items.
Right, we do.
So maybe it'd be a good thing to have those in here, share the link to it so they know what they are and have their own.
So I,
Kevin,
well, backing up a little bit to Krista's comment about policy, I think it is important that if we've got these things from last year and we haven't acted on, a lot of the things we do, we talk about, and then it just gets put to the side. So I think it's important that we have identified some policy needs to change, that we integrate them the best we can into the schedule or into the work plan. And going back last year, I understand this is a framework and whatnot, but there was some criticism that we didn't have a very detailed work plan. Obviously, there was some agenda for that, but I think we need to think about the framework that we're developing and being pretty deliberate about it. Thinking about the merger study committee, Tracy, our facilitator, started out with a work plan for very heavy in the near future and very, as you go down further out, it gets less detailed. But that work plan got updated every meeting. With this is done, this slip, we got to deal with that still. And there's some fill-ins in the future as future things are known. So with those two last comments I'm making, I guess if we made it more of a live document, as opposed to something that we gotta like lay out the whole year and make sure we got everything, you know, okay, what we think we know, but it should be live. Touched upon, or at least offered each meeting perhaps.
so we don't have to approve it tonight. We can go back and we still have time to stay with, you know, to be compliant with our policy by taking some time and adding some more to it. Just need to table it when we get to the next action item. But we can take the comments that we've heard and try to build out a couple of months with the additional meetings and see, bring it back.
Yeah, like I
Maybe
said,
to-
I don't necessarily think we need to move anything that's on here. We obviously all work we need to do.
Right.
But for instance, trying to get traction on a policy, there was some suggestions or either suggestions or report felt they wanted to move it in one direction or another. Having a second meeting pinpointed somewhere along the line for policy governance work, there could be even an agenda that was tied to that topic. So you could track the issues that have been lingering and are not moving for the next policy governance session that we hold. And we go down through and say, hey, what have we done, you know, since the last time we talked about these deficiencies? Have we done anything with them? Have they moved anywhere? Right now, it's a little tough to, they sort of like further off into the,
Right, and then the biggest fire gets dealt with and.
there's no listing of the old
Constantly.
business and what's happened to the old business.
Mhm.
And that's true for a lot of things, like the advisory councils, for instance. You know, we sort of tabled it. It's not really gone anywhere. It's now kind of a focus of one of the paragraphs in the merger study. And obviously, we need to wait for the merger vote to sort of make any real decision what we're going to do with that. But it's just an example of another topic that kind of just gets talked about for a little bit and forgotten, and we don't really know what's going on.
I was thinking to your point earlier, Steve, I think we have some items we can build into those second meetings, and I think maybe a different format. Kevin, I'm thinking about what you're saying, that makes some sense. And rather than necessarily waiting until the next meeting to collect ideas, people could send on ideas that they have in the meantime. And we can build that into a revised draft that tries to incorporate that into our schedule that includes those second meetings.
You're talking about in this plan as it is right now.
Or possibly a different format where we take the same work that's in here and organize it a little differently. Like the format for the work plan that Kevin was referencing is very different than the format this is. So we'd have to play with format to see what works to make it live and incorporate it all. But in some format or another, take all of the work, make it live, including these ideas for the other meeting. Bring that back for the board to review. And with 2 meetings in September, there's 2 opportunities in September to adopt, rather than just the one. So we could bring it back to the first September meeting, see what folks think about it, and even make adjustments again, and then approve for the second.
I'm also curious on agenda planning. Probably get the email from Jennifer like the week before.
That's usually the goal. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the first time anybody other than maybe Krista, Dawn, and yourself see what's on the agenda. And I don't know if that might be an opportunity to hook people to think about what they want on the next agenda. Because obviously nobody's going to turn around the one that's in front of them and screw that up.
Right.
The planning that's been done to get that work finished. But it might be a good reminder time to say, now's the time to provide your suggestions for our next second meeting.
Especially with 2 a month, because then every other week we're sending an agenda out with 2 meetings a month. So there's not a lot of time in between.
It's just a reminder, it gets people kind of used to the rhythm of, if we want to try to move things and get them on the agenda, somebody has something they want to put on it. Here's when you do it.
Because more or less the week after the meeting that just happened, the next agenda is going out. So to get people thinking about it a week before the meeting starts gives them a 2-week window.
Right.
Is there a way, whatever the new format is for the work plan, however that shakes out, is there a way to put that as one of the topics in the agenda that we always just have it to add to? Then it never gets lost or forgotten, and then people could reference the agenda they get versus, what the work plan is, and then whatever items slip can just be, added to the next one, or it just seems like there needs to be like an extra step of connection to it, maybe.
Right, it would seem to me if we put 10 minutes at the end of the meeting to say agenda planning, and we could do for the next meeting and have that work plan there to pull up and look at it.
Or
At that
even just
moment.
as one of the, one of the topics that we, like, in the consent agenda, how we go through and we just read all that stuff, it could just be part of one of those things that.
And when you're saying
at the top.
it could be the agenda, the work plan, I'm sorry,
Yes,
would be one of the items. Yeah.
and then you can, because then if we get it a week in advance and we want to put topics in for 3 weeks out, then you have the work plan to look at whatever topics have been missed and or stepped over for whatever. Put your ideas right into that document that's evolving.
Well, the work plan is on the agenda at the very top.
I mean, the new one, when, how you were saying you can add your ideas to it.
Yeah.
And then you can just type into it.
I think we have to be careful about that, because if we're all adding to one document, it constitutes a meeting. So
Well,
we'll have
what
to,
I was suggesting was, if you looked at the work plan on your screen now, there's a tab at the bottom called parking lot
Yeah.
items. This is just people putting in a topic.
Right.
A suggested topic. It's not a not putting it into our actual work plan. It's just putting it into a repository. So whoever wants to look and see what's under part of it can use it to refresh their memory of the things that people want to talk about.
I was sort of taking your idea and pushing it one step farther.
But I think Don's point is correct.
Yeah.
If we're all personally trying to modify the work plan, then I think it gets very tricky.
Anyway,
Technically and legally.
yes.
I like the idea of having maybe at the end of every meeting, just touch base about the next one, because I think that at that point, when somebody can say, oh, I would like to discuss, preschool and education of people under 5. And other people would be like, oh, well, and we can kind of like look at what's most important to the group. As well as some of the stuff that is timely, which is like the topics that are kind of like hot button right now, and then kind of prioritize them. I feel like that could go quickly.
That might be actually a great standard piece of the second meeting. One issue with the standard business meetings, it's very long.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that second meeting.
Yeah.
But at that standard meeting, kind of say, okay, in 2 weeks, what are our topics? What's most important to everybody, or what have you been getting emails about from community members or teachers or whatever? And then we can kind of like plug it in, or maybe we even want to say like, hey, can we hear from special ed or ELP or art or whatever, outdoor learning, or some sort of like kind of smaller thing that maybe we don't hear about, that kind of leads to the ends and the goals of our students as a whole.
Ownership linkage.
Yeah.
But maybe not at the end of the meeting.
Well, that
Maybe more towards the front.
yeah, anytime. I'm just thinking like if we can just like almost popcorn and brainstorm a couple things for that next meeting, and then we might have time to like pull in those people to like share the great stuff they're doing or something like that.
The restraint the board would need to exercise though in doing that is, and this is hard not to slip into this, is to start to solve the thing that we just brought up as the topic for a future agenda item. It usually sparks a discussion that may take you down a path. But
And the other thing is that you have to think about our policies and what they say. Your statement about it as a group, that group responsibility, because it can't, an agenda item can't be just one person's desire to take the time of the board. If the group decides, absolutely, we can, and it's within our little bucket of work, definitely, but it can't be a one person, I want to talk about this, and that's what's on the agenda. Everybody else is like, yeah, no. So,
Well, I was just thinking that it is really helpful for board members to get a better window into what's coming up next and to kind of have a little time at each meeting to be refreshed of that and to acknowledge what hasn't occurred yet. So I like that idea of like, okay, what's still on our parking lot and what's our next meeting looking like. I also like the idea of adding more detail to that second meeting in our overall work plan. What I think would be ideal so that we're more forward focused is that we think about overall board engagement and ownership linkage and have a year-long plan for connecting with, and hear me say a few words about that later. Like what are the groups we want to hear from and how do we plan that out for the year versus in response to something we might hear from somebody, because then we're getting more reactive rather than proactive. And so I think having a year-long plan, maybe every other second meeting of the month, addresses those interest groups or those stakeholders or those constituents. So I do think there is value for us hearing a little more of what's happening on the ground, but in a planful way. So I wonder if maybe to move this along, the three of us can brainstorm a little bit more. And it sounds like I'm not quite ready to approve this today, but maybe we can present some other options based on what we've heard and see what people think about it. Next meeting.
So then we'll meet for the next item, I just need a motion and a second to table it till September.
I move to table the approval of the board work plan to our September. The date is of our official
Our next meeting,
Right, but September 27th.
Before.
Well, I want to make sure we have enough time to get it right. So, if there's no like, is it important that it's done?
It's policy. Or
Policy
it
says September.
It says September, so we still can.
we could amend,
And it doesn't mean you can't
we could amend,
see it at the first meeting. It just means that,
Like we give the final approval, because we might have more discussion at our next meeting.
right, you might see something and decide, yeah, we want to tweak a little more or whatever. That gives us the flexibility to put it up.
Right, so Krista, you're not saying that it's not an agenda item at our next meeting. You're just saying. in
I was
terms of a
saying that
decision
we
item,
take action
it's-
on the 27th, that we could discuss it, but that we're like giving ourselves until the end of September that we have to take action.
Gives us a chance for a conversation, next meeting, make some adjustments and come back to finalize.
And Chris just seconded that. All right, any further discussion? Does everyone understand? Does
I
it mean
just
we-
wonder in the interim, I mean, I'm not sure what we have between now and then on the work plan. that we could simply, moving forward with the plan as written pending further adjustments. I mean, it may not be crucial to state that. I mean, are we skipping anything because we're approving it at the end of September, the month of September itself?
I mean, I don't think, I mean, we have,
That's all I'm asking. is-
We have monitoring
Yeah,
reports
reports
on there
on
for the end of September,
right.
so we
And
assume
so,
those will still be.
yes,
completed.
I mean, that might just be part of the motion. We're not approving. We're planning on growth. We'll assume we'll continue with it as written. So approved.
I think that's been our practice, like we just continue on, even though it's not,
Even if-
even if we
What's
haven't adopted it as our.
So I don't know if that needs to be stated
or
or not.
approved it.
I don't know that it has to be stated as of now because it's planned through September. And so we wouldn't, even without having had this conversation, it's planned through September, which is the date by which you have to act. So we wouldn't have been able to adjust anything prior anyway because the action wasn't scheduled to be taken. So I think we're fine to continue with the 3 monitoring reports that are due September, and they would have been doing it. So
Okay.
it's a matter of what happens following that meeting.
All right.
That will get adjusted. Which again, I think what I'm hearing is it's not actually deleting or even necessarily rearranging anything that's already on this work plan. It's about filling the work plan out even more.
Any further discussion on? All those in favor of tabling the approval of the board work plan until the 9/27 meeting to take action, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so that passes. All right, the long-awaited action of approving the monitoring report for 4.8 ownership linkage. And you received that under separate cover. The policy only got linked in the agenda, but today you should have received the actual report. So we'll need a motion to approve the monitoring report for 4.8.
So moved.
Second.
Chris?
I just have a question on my own report.
All right,
When does Lincoln come off of reports? It doesn't need to come off now before it's approved.
you mean the language where it spells out?
First sentence, looking back in there, so they can still be on for now.
Correct. That it is,
Until, so it'd be 23, 24, when it's.
Well,
like, when-
actually, I believe it would
Change that.
It would be changed from this point on because the state board removed them. So,
So the next report.
right, the next report. Yeah. Any other questions around the report? Sorry it took so long to get in here. Just kept getting. All right.
So, before we vote on it,
Mhm.
normally when there's a non-compliant thing, is there some suggestion of how?
There should be, yes. So,
Did a great job of pointing out the weaknesses. And I don't know, in a board monitoring report, if it's the person monitoring the report who's responsible for cleaning up compliance issues.
yes, well, usually there's some possible ways or, yeah, examples or maybe some thoughts about how you might become compliant.
To wait.
Yeah, right. Specifically the non-existent, like.
Yeah.
That was,
Um,
I didn't know I was supposed to put that in.
This is why I brought it up. So,
I'm a little confused, is it actually part of the monitoring report or is it a separate effort?
No, it's usually contained, part of it is if you're not in compliance, you tell how you think we might get to compliance. So,
I think it's interesting how it plays out a little differently, I think, for the board policies versus the superintendent policies, right? So as an individual, you charge me with being compliant with all the policies, and so I can report directly in my monthly report how I am suggesting we become compliant. You don't have individual authority as a board member, you have group authority, so to put in how we would become compliant is probably only a suggestion as much as anything in here than it is necessarily action to take.
like, I did a monitoring report where I recommended maybe the peer-to-peer evaluation, and then we talked about it, and everybody agreed, yep, that's what we want to do, so we went forward with that.
So does it need to be amended before or accept? Can it be accepted in that?
You would need to vote it down.
I think it comes back to a point that Kevin made earlier, that Steve made earlier about the tendency to leave things hanging. I think that's the idea of having language in a monitoring report that says if you're reporting non-compliance, in that report, there's a plan on how to become compliant so that it doesn't just sort of hang out there in the ether. And in this case, it's not really Aaron's responsibility to write a linkage plan, which is the action that's, I'm sure that would be appreciated. But for that responsibility, it falls solely on her.
great homework for a policy governance committee. Make a recommendation to the board. Or potentially, I mean, this is, ownership linkage is a little bit of CEC work. So we could make it the responsibility of the person that was just
Well,
left.
she's not in the room. But I guess I had a question about that. I mean, we've got this CDC committee function. Doesn't talk about it. Doesn't talk about it in subcommittee. It says the boards.
Right.
So in my mind, there's a number of ways the board can do it. One of them would be through some meeting events. And they're sort of doing, I'm not real clear on how just a better understanding of the vision of CCP when it comes to something. It's our intent that they would be doing all this work.
So when that committee was set up, we gave them a charge and kind of set them up, but they came back, that initial group came back and said, listen, we're happy to help with this, but this is not resting all on us. The board has a duty of ownership linkage spelled out in our policy that we connect with these people. The community engagement, what we asked them for is a plan, like how could we do this? And so that plan would help us then get to our piece of the work.
I think that's the 2B that's here. The board may establish a committee to assist it in creating and evaluating. It doesn't necessarily take the onus off the board for executing it.
Yeah.
It'd be great to have Krista here to comment on it, because I'm sure she has, it sounded like she had things to say about this. But anyway, that's the one thing that I noticed here. I mean, I think the report's very well written. I think it points out some deficiencies that we definitely have. It's just, how do we go about it as a group? We want to stay as being the alliance steps.
Any other hand up? Sandy?
Thanks, Don. I haven't had as much opportunity to participate on the CEC committee, but I just want to reiterate, I think what Steve said, that, we have the authority under this policy to establish a committee to assist. I mean, and that's all the committees are. They don't make decisions separately. They just do a deeper dive, make recommendations, and bring those recommendations back to the board to ask the board to take action. It's just a more efficient, way of taking that deeper dive, because it does involve a lot of work. And I've seen a tremendous amount of work that the Community Engagement Committee has done. It's pretty amazing. And so it would be nice to figure out how to take all that work that they do and put it into effect at the board level. And how we do that, it seems, we need, I agree with Patrick's comment that, this is a great report pointing out issues, but as a board, I think we need to decide what are the next steps, how do we take these concerns if we in fact accept this report. I think it's asking us to make sure it's not just in the parking lot, but that it makes it somewhere pretty clearly somewhere that we take action, because this is such a huge part of what the board has to do. And I really do feel like so many people work very hard to reach out to the community. And this is just sort of that last part. How do we make it come back around? So that all that work actually comes to some actions taken, and hopefully some results as well, with more data and more input.
Kevin?
One other thought is this talks pretty much exclusively, but not entirely, about the ends policy. And whenever we've gone to the community and talked to the community, the discussion or the support of things that you would consider ends are non-controversial, and they get flushed out pretty quickly, and everybody's happy with it and move on to the controversial things. School closure, busing, all these other things. And I don't know, those are the sticky points that when you start talking about engaging in any aspect or across all aspects of the community, and even though you're risking the weed scenario, those are the real things within the community. And we all expect, broad-based educational opportunities. And if we think about the goals that we developed with the initial community engagement, was it 2.5 years ago, it was really easy to gel all the things that kind of point towards an ends policy or ends desire. But it's not the stuff that's real to a lot of the constituency or the ownership. So I don't know. It's a double-edged sword. You got to walk the line or whatever you want to say, but seems like there should be some recognition that those things are, you want to call them aspirational or tangential, not real as much as some of the more pressing things, specifically what we dealt with in the last 2.5 years of school closure. That ends up being, well, discussions. Say in this policy. So
Okay, so we can approve it as it is now and put it on the next meeting agenda to sort of work together to come up with some compliance or ways to get to compliance.
I'm trying to find an example of an ownership linkage plan, just to have some general idea of what that means to then share.
All right, so we can accept the monitoring report and then still revisit ways. It doesn't stop us from working towards finding ways to improve. Right, so all those in favor of approving the monitoring report for 4.08 ownership linkage, please say aye or give a thumbs up.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions. What's that?
Are there the questions? Do we find?
Whatever. Oh, yeah. I can print out that sheet.
I said nothing.
Should almost have it memorized.
I know, I should at this point.
Find the evidence.
The information provided,
Finding the information, the interpretation is reasonable.
is the interpretation reasonable?
Yes.
Does the data demonstrate the accomplishment of the interpretation? All right, so I will check those off and Kevin, I think you sent a revised comment sheet. I'll attach that as well. I don't have it with me because I haven't been back by a printer yet. All right. All right. So now we're moving down to an action item to approve the merger study committee to facilitate a joint informational meeting for the merger vote with Addison Northwest School District. So this is just the formality. There's some stuff as the Mount Abraham Unified School District that we have to do because the merger study committee doesn't have the authority to do. But this is one piece that we have the authority to do, so.
And I think this is just intended to give some clarity to the merger study committee that yes, the MAUSD board is saying we accept your offer to basically provide the information for the informational session.
Chris. Second. Bailey, second. Any further questions or comments? All those in favor of approving the merger study committee to facilitate a joint information meeting for the merger vote with Addison Northwest School District, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so that passes. Okay. Next is an action item to approve November 1st as the informational meeting for the merger vote. Again, another formality that we have to handle. Chris. Okay. The other? Any further questions, comments?
I can just add a piece of detail there that the recommendation from legal counsel is that to make sure that we're compliant with the statute, that each entity has a physical location where they're hosting the session, but the session can happen simultaneously and be linked through Zoom. So not unlike what we did for the Starksboro withdrawal vote. That way, as Northwest has a physical location within their town, or towns, and MAUSD does as well, that would be effectively one session.
Is there going to be a moderator and they're going to open and close both districts' meetings?
I think there are a lot of details like that to work out still, especially knowing now that it's really going to be two physical locations. Thinking about how to manage that, I think is work of the merger study committee, assuming Addison Northwest agrees like MAU, as Steve just did, but that's how we want to run it. So. And the merger study committee meets again soon next week.
Thursday.
It was the 31st, not, does that get pushed?
There was
It
a-
was the 6th.
It's the 6th, okay. But I think at that meeting, the intent is to start fleshing out some of those details.
Crystal's got her hand up.
Krista?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just wondering if our merger study committee reps know if there was any conversation about meeting within each community beforehand, before a November 1st meeting, or sort of ways to connect within each community separately before one big information meeting altogether.
Yes, that like our September 6th meeting is just a work session for all of those avenues. This is kind of like our that's primarily what we're planning on the 6th and all of our meetings in September. And that is sort of like the final little piece that we need to do. So I think our energy is gonna actually be spent on all of the other things that you're thinking of. And if you have great ideas, please send them along.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. All those in favor of approving the November 1st as the informational meeting for the merger vote, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that passes. Okay, I need a motion to table the warning for the merger vote, the next item.
So moved.
All right, Steve? Chris? Any discussion? All those in favor of tabling the warning for the approval of the warning for the merger vote, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that one passes as well. Okay, next is an action item to determine the proxy for the VHI Visit annual meetings.
To give you a little context for that, so this is an annual item. So I don't have the paperwork yet for VHI, but usually follows the same format as VSBIT. So each of these organizations typically have their annual meeting in October down at Lake Maury in conjunction with the VSBA and VSA annual conference. Sometimes this board has had a person they've designated to go down and represent MAUSD and cast a vote for MAUSD. Other times no one has physically gone, so we've identified VSBIT or VHI as proxy. And so their board votes, and whatever direction their board votes, the MAUSD vote goes along with that. And so this is the time when this board has to decide, is anybody going? And if so, does this board authorize that person as proxy? Or does this board want to designate the organization, whether it's VHI or VSBIT, as proxy, or not have a vote cast? Those are sort of the options.
In the past, we've known like they're not voting on anything substantial or.
So the agenda is they're looking to elect 2 members. There are 2 seats whose terms are up. Both of the people who hold those seats have expressed an interest in running again. I'm not aware of any other candidates. So it doesn't sound like a really significant vote from my perspective.
I move that we vote by proxy.
So that's Steve and Chris. Any discussion?
And just to be clear, that means assign proxy to VSBIT or VHI as opposed to an individual as proxy.
We're busy.
And then I just have a form that I'll be filled out on that states that.
Okay.
Sign off on it.
All right, so all those in favor of voting by proxy, that means assigning it to VHI and VSBIT for the annual meetings, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that one passes. All right, so we're gonna move up item J, which is the merger resolution. Just a chance for us to talk about, again, we started a little bit at the retreat. do we want to compose something that is a statement from this board, or that's what this item is, furthering that discussion?
And I'll add that I reached out to the transportation consultant to try and, in light of the conversation we had at the retreat, to try and get a sense of what additional clarity he could help provide, so that we can share that with this board as you're thinking about forming your sort of position or opinion or thoughts on the merger, but also as a resource to share with the community to try and offer information on that topic, which we know is an important topic to a lot of people. So we're sort of in a back and forth right now about what options there are and what work is entailed in that. So more in the future, but it's still evolving right now.
Krista, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering if our reps might help guide us in this. You know what? I mean, I'm assuming since they sat on the committee and the committee made a recommendation to bring this to a vote, that they're in agreement. But I guess, you know, as our reps, maybe we hear their perspective as our you know, intermediaries to the committee. Like what is their overall feeling in terms of how this might further our district sustainability toward the ends?
Sarah? Or Liz?
Well, the merger study committee developed a list of pros and cons, which are in the report. And the feeling of the merger study committee, which I think not unanimous in most there, I think overwhelming majority, there were two that didn't, voted for it. You know, some of the cons are, probably the biggest con is transportation. There's a lot of unknowns about transportation and projected worst case. But on the pro side, the opportunity to put the two high schools together, potentially, the opportunity to have a separate middle school, potentially, the ability to have fuller classrooms that will allow for, you know, heightened discussion, better use of staff is recognized at the high school level. The consolidation would potentially result in savings, avoidances, not savings, avoidances of right sizing staff, consolidation of the central office avoids costs. So those are all pretty significant pluses. There's not a lot of opinion as to elementary school pluses and minuses, if you will. The intent, I think, at least as foreseeable intent, which is probably not that far. Foreseeable intent is that if we have a robust system, the elementary schools will thrive in their current situation. And the merger study committee was very careful. There was a lot of discussion about preserving elementary schools and protecting them, but giving a latitude for the unforeseen. There's stability in the first 4 years, absolute stability, really. And then there is a supermajority and a supermajority on top of that to facilitate a lively discussion, I'm sure, as to the eventual need of a building or not need of a building. Campus, if you will. There is a lot of comfort, I think. There's a position that is almost ironclad in certain towns. There's a lot of comfort, at least in the majority of the towns or the majority of the players, that will provide the adequate protection for all schools. So with all that in mind, the enhancements for high school, junior high, a reasonable protection for elementary schools, balanced against the unknown, or how do we effectively solve the transportation issue, led the merger study committee to significant yes vote, push or move forward and recommend it. Back to that, Sarah.
Yeah, just in general, also why we went towards it was the whole concept of declining enrollment and expected, especially at the middle and high school level, 15% in Addison Northwest and almost 14% in non-aid. And that essentially combining them together would pretty much take us back to the size that MAUSD was in the mid 2000s. So that kind of gives us a little bit more power when you have more students. The other piece of it was how, like a lot of our goals that we set from Act 46, we achieved. But we still, if I'm reading this correctly or remembering correctly, we're still over 121% of the average statewide spending in equalized pupil, and or at 121%, I guess is how you would say it. But so we're, even though we've trimmed so much and done all of that, we're still at that level as a collection, I would say. We have done really well with trying to maintain our property taxes and our spending, but there's not a lot of room left. The positions, we're gonna have to make some pretty drastic cuts in positions, and we probably will have to do that regardless of a merger, but we have a lot more control over how we utilize the positions that we have. And it could still potentially increase programming with a shift in how we utilize positions. We have a lot more, I'm coming up, reminding myself of everything. I think that that the main purpose behind this, the driving force, was central office and the middle and high school, quality and opportunities and spending, that this wasn't as a giant thing for the elementary school. So as Kevin said, we really tried to maintain that, the likelihood is they're probably all staying open, and that isn't really where the purpose of this lies. We still have good representation on when we wrote the articles. I'm trying to think what else. Just as far as having a supervisory district as a group, gives us a lot of opportunity and choice for how we utilize our budgets, and it gives us an opportunity to further explore all of the ways that we've done good collaboration between the two districts. We have a really strong foundation of working together. It was really easy to watch the two administrations work well together. And I just think that was good evidence of, you know, a successful future. So my kind of what led me down, like why we got there, and then what could it possibly do? There are some losses in it. There are some costs to it, for sure. Some of them are pretty emotional, and that's okay. But there is still a lot of opportunity that I think we should embrace. And there's more stability in that system than there might be if we stay the way we are. Is that what Krista wanted?
Is that what you wanted, Krista?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
What else? I think that we still also need to remember that the status quo is unlikely. So we have to choose where we want to throw our energy into as much preservation and, I guess, growth as we can.
Well, I obviously represent a community that's very torn about this. I think most of the reaction I've got from the community has been that they're not in favor. I think the main issue is just the fact that Stark Square has been very personally involved in their school, town-wide level. They put a lot of personal effort into this school. And I think they feel a great sense of ownership about it. I think there was a lot of discussion, a lot of angst about whether or not to join in the Act 46 process in the beginning, mainly because it placed the school outside of sort of local personal control. And this is, I think, viewed by the town as another step away from what they really desire, which is to have more local control of the school. I think they're also concerned about the transportation piece. I finally got a chance to read in depth what was written in that report, and I don't know if I was very comforted by it. It was a bit vague. It appears to say that there's still a lot of work to get everybody under the hour umbrella. And I wasn't sure that they were really confident it could be done completely. Not to say if there's one kid that's not going to make the hour that throws the whole thing out the window. But I didn't have a great sense of security from it. So it's good to hear that there might be a little more. I think there's also a little bit of a sense that a little bit of uncertainty as to whether or not we really need to do this right now. We're really only in the infancy of MAUSD. Just figured out kind of how to work together as a district. And we're almost immediately going to move that now into a larger movie. And I would say people, I think we have done some great things. I'm pretty happy with the work that we've done over the last, since I've been on the board, which is right from the start of the merger. I know there's some shortcomings, but I have some today. but it's interesting to try to figure out it's a struggle to figure out how dire things are getting. The whole alligator discussion we've been having about just when is that cliff coming? We've had the cliff in front of us before. The state's pulled that cliff out from underneath us. So we had some more time to look at things a little closer, come up with some different ways to deal with budgets so that we didn't necessarily have to have a crisis at the elementary level. And I think people are wondering if we still have some time to make that come to fruition without taking such a big step, or whether things are at the point where if we don't take that step, we're really going to be disadvantaging ourselves in the very near future. I noticed in the chart in the report that they take the spending threshold out up until the state has set till 26 or 27, I forget which.
Yeah, I think more in the 26 that is on hold.
Right. So, and then it looks like, there's some discussion about what the potential threshold might be. Still don't know exactly what the weighting study is going to do this yet. So it's still a little vague about whether or not we're at the point where it has to happen this year. And whether or not we'll see enough fruition come out of some of these other low-lying fruit that Nate has pointed out to, be able to say to the voters, okay, well, we think this MAUSD deal on our own is actually sustainable out to 27, 28. Virgins may have a completely different picture. They may be looking at a situation where they really do need to merge more quickly. In the end, I think I'm still very torn about it, but I think people ought to have the right to vote. I think there's been a lot of work done to try to study it. I was disappointed that a lot of the homework that's been done, and there looks like there's been plenty of homework, didn't really come out in front of the public till sort of at the very end. We sort of got, unless you were going to every meeting and reading every meeting minute, you didn't sort of get a synopsis of the whole thing with all the indices and the appendix attached to it until now. So I'm a lot more comfortable with it now, having read all of the homework, than I was when we were simply asked to review the articles without any real background information, without any real, why are we doing this? Is it a good idea or a bad idea? So I think there's enough information out there now in front of people. I think there's evidence that the committee's carefully considered all of this stuff enough and have come to enough of a consensus with a few nays to deserve for the wider community to say one way or the other. So whether or not I'd be happy to say that I'm gung ho for it is probably not the case, but I would support it going out for a vote.
Liz?
There's a lot that you just said there, and the sense of community and ownership. I believe that I feel that for our students and the people who support them in every one of the schools. And a lot of this feels like it's about assuring that they'll have the resources they need, no matter what those needs may be, that they have access to those resources. And there was a big push and pull kind of wanting details, and then knowing that the committee itself was in no position of expertise or even really the desire to make those final decisions, because these are all things that need to happen with the communities, right? So there's potentially nothing could change if this happened. Potentially, I mean, nothing in terms of where students go to school could change. And that certainly is for sure not going to happen for years after. If the merger is approved, it wouldn't happen anytime soon, even if it was eventually going to. And I feel that it's responsible to be sure that those resources and options are there. And the idea of doing it with the community is really the only way to go about it. So all of us as families, as communities, as staff, as administrators would be in on the conversations. What makes sense academically for groupings of students? What makes sense for sharing of services? What can we do for transportation even? Those are details that have yet to be worked out, which classes and teachers would be shared in which ways. Those are all really heavily require a level of expertise and input from the school communities themselves that we can't do now, right? So this is really, to me, more of an opportunity to say these things can happen, and we could have these discussions and think about them and their options in order to be sure that the resources are there for our staff and students and families. And in the end, if other ways are found to make the low-hanging fruit, which a lot of it really doesn't feel like low-hanging fruit, right? Like multiple hats and all of these things that we're doing, they don't feel like small things to me. And so a merger is an opportunity to have other options for us all to think about and work on together, really based on student needs. So I look at this more as just an opening, and there are things that definitely can't happen if we don't do it. Like, we definitely can't have the same superintendent if we don't merge. And so there's certain things that will be entirely off the table if we don't do it, and many things that will simply be possibilities. And as much as I want to know what it exactly would look like, I would more importantly rather have it be a conversation among the people who it will affect the most, and much more deliberate and thought through than to just that would have been the rushed and really, I don't know. So that's kind of how I have been thinking about it.
Kevin?
So Starksboro's in a tough place. Steve, you have walked the line extremely well. And if you go back to the Community Engagement Committee explorations with towns 2 years ago now, there was an extensive survey done. Even at that time, I think 60% of the people in Starksboro were against any sort of a concept of a merger. That probably hasn't changed. Maybe it's even more, probably more than it was at that point. As the details come about. I think at least the way the articles are initially written to come out of the box, who's to say how it gets expedited afterwards, but my sense is you're not gonna, you need to look 5 years down the road before you see the results of some of these thoughts out there, like merging high schools, merging middle school. It's not gonna happen year 3 or 4. If it does happen 4 or 5, then, you know, and that's going to meld in with, you know, the whole coming together of some of these other things that are potentially punitive in both districts. So it's, you know, for starters, the first year frozen. And then the second year, there's some innuendos. And of course, this is all conjecture because once you get a new board in place, you know, outside of what's written in the bylaws, you know, we will start working how we will see fit. But there's been a lot of caution about, you know, year 1, 2, and maybe even 3 are very transitional, where you take nothing changes other than the fact budgets are voted on together in year 1. Year 2, you start looking at maybe there's some easy things to do academically or between campuses, but most of that year 2 is starting to assimilate central office, whatever that means. I mean, you've got a business system, you've got curriculum, you got all these other things that have got to come together. So by the time you get that going, and then year 3, maybe you're looking at some of those more physical things that you can see. So you know, one of the favorite things is to kick the can down the road. But if you look at just the ingrained kicking of the can, if you will, internally versus the desire to kick the can externally, you know, I don't know how far those are out of sync with taking it slow and deliberately.
Krista?
Yeah, hi. I just was thinking about what Steve said with respect to the sense of urgency, you know, and I think on the one hand, especially hearing the update from Nate Levinson and the work around cost-effective mindset and bounded autonomy, you know, there's a lot of potential there just within our own system that is going to be really valuable and helpful in many ways, including bringing us more together as a district than we have been able to be since Act 46. And so that's work that, you know, is important to see unfold and could get us a long way. You know, but I think the story that I've always really wished we could find a way to tell is, you know, it's harder to really tell because it's not as visible to everyone. But there is an urgency there in that I think we could still be doing better by a lot of our students in terms of the programs and services we can offer. You know, we do have families choosing to go different places because of what we can or can't offer in terms of curriculum. And I'm speaking really mostly at middle and high school level. It's amazing what we offer our kids, and I'm really proud that my 3 are there this year. But that being said, I recognize that there is a lot of untapped potential. You know, and again, illustrating a really specific example that is, you know, personal to our family. You know, a couple of years ago when we tried to pass a bond vote, folks had the very valid question, which was, why are we going to potentially renovate so much money into this building? We first need to talk about what we're doing with all of our buildings and where we're headed. That's a valid point. And so we paused that process. And in the meantime, if you are a person with a mobility issue, to access the Mount Abe facility, you are like a second-class citizen. You travel in a dark and dingy elevator by yourself on one end of the building, and you have to make your way all the way around the building in a path that's completely different from everyone else. And that's because we did not renovate the building. And so that's just one example. And I know there are others where we're not doing the best we can for our kids. So if we don't do this now, is it emergent? Is there a rush? Well, probably from a lot of folks' perspective, maybe not. But I would just say that there are things that we're not doing while we're in this holding pattern. And I think that if we think about our ends, which is to really ensure that we can provide the most robust education for our kids. Status quo isn't really cutting it from my perspective. So that's sort of how I feel about the timeliness of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Krista. Bailey?
I think, echoing what some other people have said about the timeline and taking it slow, I think it's going to really, that part really kind of changed it for me too, being like, okay. And I do think that stalling certain things that we've had to stall has greatly impacted more, and like Chris was saying, about other areas too. And I hear a lot in my community like, well, why don't we just merge central office? Why don't we just do this? Why don't we just do that? And so getting the message out there that we can't do those things, we can't just decide that only these things get shared and not other stuff, I think is an important one. Because there does seem to be, I think Moncton thinks a lot along the lines of Stark Squirrel of like, bigger is not better. We would rather control this ourselves. We don't really want to do this. And I don't know that we're getting enough of the stories, like Krista's story, out there that actually weaning has impacted kids in a not good way. And that we're still doing great things, but not everybody is exceeding at the rate that they could exceed if we had more updated facilities, maybe more opportunities outside of our buildings, things of that nature, that we could have by putting these two kind of groups together.
Sarah?
Yeah, I think that there is people believe that we just started talking about all of this, and we've been talking about it for a long time, and there is, I think, a pretty big sense of urgency when all of the sudden, like, it could be this fall that we make pretty big cuts, and this is the only place we have left to do it. I mean, for Jen's no driver's ed, it happened fast, and all of a sudden, when that happens, we don't want to start over and go through another process when this might be our only way to avoid some of those, like, wow, that's real. We're not offering any advanced classes in this because we can't. We are, we start cutting extracurriculars and things that make a big difference in kids' lives. Like, we have, 2 less science teachers. Well, that, everybody's like, oh, that's 20. It's so, there's 24 kids in a class or whatever. But that's way less classes. That's way less choice. And so much about education right now is a lot of menu, like this works for you and this will work for you, and these different pathways. And we are actually, the longer we wait, the more we're actually sending everybody down the same path, which is the exact opposite of our goal as people running education. I don't want to wait.
I appreciate this discussion. I also am noticing the time and that we have a couple more things that we still have to get through. I want to give Krista enough time to get into some of the, 15 minutes or so, Krista, about what you need for your community engagement stuff. Sandy, do you have your hand up?
I do. Just it's really brief. I actually really appreciate all the comments being made, because I think with any plan, there are always pros and cons. I did watch a few of the merger study committee meetings, and I really think a lot of effort was trying to balance, I think, really positive moves towards trying to increase curriculum opportunities for students, but then also the practical side, which I just want to note that one of the things I think that's really tough and that I think affects a lot of our towns is the governance structure. I know that the merger study committee spent a lot of time trying to figure out what would be an appropriate governance structure, a new district with a unified, sort of like how we are as a unified district board versus more of a supervisory union setup where people might have a different governance process. And interestingly, I feel like besides the practical issues with transportation, which are very real, and like, how is this going to happen? And that's for a future board to decide. It brings me to the question of what kind of governance structure is in place. In the brief time that I've been so far on the MAUSD board, as opposed to when I was when we were not a district and before Act 46, the biggest things that we've seen is perfectly exemplified by the report that we just received with regard to community linkage. Basically, it was mostly non-compliance or partial compliance, or some non-compliance. And I think it's been a struggle for this board legitimately to figure out, how do we stay connected to our 5 schools and our high school when it's just one board and have adequate representation? And we've been mulling around that issue since I've been on the board just these past year and a half or so. So I do have concerns about the structure of bigger in terms of governance, and just having one board control it is not necessarily better. I do think that it is helpful to have flexibility, to allow them the ability to move and be flexible, like some of the things that Sarah mentioned, and even, Bailey mentioned. But at the same time, we miss out in providing actual real voices from each of the communities, and it's difficult to do. So, as we move forward, I think it's a legitimate question about how is this new structure suggested by the merger study committee really going to provide for actual connection with the communities in each of the schools and their needs.
Thank you. Krista?
Yeah, sorry. I know we want to move on, but I did just want to say that I was having a major coughing fit during the 4.8 monitoring report, and I didn't get a chance to share any thinking on that. And, I would just say that I appreciate the work that was put into the interpretation or into our, report on how we did, but I think it missed a lot of work that has been done and is ongoing around engaging with our community. And I just have to mention that, Sandy, because I think that, we're missing all of the work that led us up to hearing community proposals and the years prior to that. Maybe that was brought up by somebody else, but, and I also just want to say that it is always going to be an ongoing commitment of the board. We absolutely can do better, but I don't think that it's a reason not to consider this governance structure. And I think, more continued robust community engagement plus the bounded autonomy work with Nate is huge in terms of making sure not just community members, but building principals and staff have a voice and an ongoing voice. And so I think that it absolutely has to be a priority of a merged district, just as it should be of a smaller system. Super important, but I don't think it's an either or. I think it's possible.
We're not going to be done with this.
So I agree with Krista. There were a few things in the 4.8 report that probably could have pointed to directly as evidence. I mean, Aaron was talking about partial compliance, so didn't want to nitpick too much. I mean, we did hear the community on, our original proposal for facilities. We did hear the community on going back to Nate. We didn't hear the community on giving the towns a right to vote on the closure of their school with the resolution that we came up with. But one of the things that's the very last article in this new proposal for the articles is advisory councils and getting community input. And it's almost identical wording that we had in the MAUSD articles, and we've done very little with it. And I think that I struggle to see how this new group with more schools and more responsibility, with a group that's really only a couple of members larger than what we have right now, is going to be able to handle all of the various things that might come up without some help. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was a supporter of the advisory councils, is that we would be able to use them as a method of not only a link to local issues, but as folks to help with the work.
Chris, isn't this whole thing about whether we want to issue a resolution or not?
Yes.
And not to debate the pros and cons of the merger?
Well, we wanted to hear from our committees, and I think that we're gonna have to bring this back with something for you to bounce off of. Some sort of statement and see if we can come to an agreement on that. So we'll work on that and we'll see it again. So we'll move on now to the Community Engagement Committee update. Krista, do you want to take this? Are you cough free?
Sure. Yes, it's amazing how an air-conditioned car can make one feel versus a very humid building. So I'm here, and hopefully everybody can see the update that I just sent everyone. And basically, what I'm hoping to get feedback on is if folks are on board with sending a back-to-school communication of some kind next week from the board, welcoming people back. I think that would be a good thing to do. And there's some bulleted suggestions of what we might include. And a couple of them bleed into staff work. And so what I think we would need to do is figure out if it's appropriate to ask Patrick if he might want to see if anybody from the admin team or any building principals might have a line or two they want to share. And I added that because I think one of the ideas that was brought up, and this was talked about in the Community Engagement Committee meeting a couple of meetings ago, this idea of doing this sort of communication. And one of the ideas was to, share a little on the Mount A lobby renovation and what we're excited to see there. So if we do something like that, I just wonder if there are any other highlights. I put some examples here in this bullet, but a line or two, and directing people to know that they're going to be hearing much more from their building principals on all the great things that they're going to be rolling out. But here are a couple highlights. So these are just some ideas, and then a couple that are specific to our work. One is just letting people know whatever information we do have to share on the vote. So when the info session will be, and a link to the merger study committee video that they put out, and anything else that committee would want to share that we can plug now for people. So I guess that's the first thing, is the back to school communication. Do people think this is a good idea? What do you think about the bullets there? And is anything missing?
So Krista, when is your next meeting?
So our next meeting is not until the first Tuesday in September. So this particular communication would be drafted and posted before that meeting. So I'm hoping to get some content ideas finalized now from this group so that it can run before our next meeting.
When you say now, do you mean tonight?
Well, what we usually do is start a draft. We get a draft sort of finalized and send it around to Don and Patrick and a couple people on the committee by Friday. So I guess tonight or tomorrow or by Thursday the latest. If you have anything to add or any feedback, the one thing that I would like to know is what people's thoughts, and that includes you as well, Patrick, what people's thoughts are about adding a piece or two about specific to our buildings.
I think that's a nice idea. I know everyone's excited to see if anything's been done in the building, and who the new teachers are and things like that. So I like the bullets. I think that those are all good topics to share.
Kevin?
So the media for this to go out would probably obviously be like emails and probably front page. Would this also go to that quarter page or 8-page ad that we typically have in the Addison periodically, or where's this going?
Yes.
I should say.
Yeah, so these communications usually go to Front Porch Forum. They go out, excuse me, in an email to all district families, and then on the Addison Independent. So school starts Wednesday. So my hope would be that we would get this communication out in the first 2 ways before Wednesday, but that it would be in the printed paper on Thursday. So we're a little bit behind, but I still think it would be great to have something in the paper as well.
I certainly don't have any objection to it. I think it's a great idea.
Not hearing anybody disagree, Krista, so it sounds like you have the blessings.
Okay, and then a couple of other things quickly. So we've already been talking about the upcoming merger vote, and you know, our committee, I think, is going to be focused on helping to get out whatever information the merger study committee wants to share out. But I think as we figure out what our board's perspective is, I think it will be important for us to share that as well. So it sounds like we're not there yet, which is fine. When we are there, I hope that the community engagement committee can be part of getting that information out to MAUSD voters. And I think it sounds like I know the answer to the question of who's responsible for providing most of this information about the merger, and that's the committee. A couple of things that could help provide clarity for that, for our community, that the committee might consider. One would be an executive summary of the report. As Steve mentioned, the articles on the report are quite lengthy. It might be great if somebody could write a 1 or 2 pager to hit the highlights. Making the video more prominent on our website would be great. And I guess I would just encourage all of us to think about anything else that would be helpful for the committee to consider as they think about rolling their information campaign out. I also that's really about information. I wondered also if there have been any conversations within the committee about other discussions prior to the information meeting with different constituent groups. And I don't know if, I think maybe Sarah, you said that you haven't gotten there yet, but putting on my engagement hat and thinking about work with Sue McCormick, I just think that finding ways to connect with people and in a dialogue and discussion prior to hearing a lot of information about something that makes them feel more involved and part of the conversation. So that's just something for the merger study committee to think about. And then other board engagement. So on the monitoring report, Erin noted the lack of a 3-year engagement plan. And it's a dance of whether the committee develops that plan or the board sets priorities and then the committee makes those happen. And so I think that we'll be looking for ideas from this group, that some were mentioned earlier by Bailey, along the lines of different constituents we might want to hear from. It'd be great for this group to identify some of those so that we can then as a committee work on what a 3-year plan would look like.
So Krista, we're going to talk at a September meeting about 4.8 again and come up with some ideas as a group that we think will help us, you know, with that plan. So we'll be talking
that's
about
fantastic. Okay, great. Thank you. And that's all for me.
Any questions for Kristen? All right. So now we'll move down to a discussion item around Lincoln reps on the board, and Dina is with us via Zoom. So we began this conversation at the retreat and continuing on. Hi, Dina.
Good evening. You just want me to roll right into it?
Why don't you?
I'm sorry, you can hear?
Yes, we can hear you. Go
Okay.
ahead.
I was asked a question regarding the fact that what the effect was on Lincoln's withdrawal effective May 18th on the representation of the MAUSD board. And the short answer is that Lincoln is not a member of MAUSD. And as such, does not have the authority to have representatives from the town of Lincoln on the MAUSD board. That's reflected in the adjustment of membership in the Mount Abraham Unified School District, which is the certification that on June 17th was sent out over Dan French and Chair Olson's signature. It's an interesting status to be in because you are a supervisory district and not an SU, and the State Board of Ed particularly did not make the decision to make you into an SU in May, which would have had potentially a different effect here. They left you as a supervisory district. And what is clear about the adjustment of membership in MAUSD certification is that the membership has been adjusted to reflect Bristol, Moncton, New Haven, and Starksboro. However, Mount Abraham is responsible for the education of students in Lincoln until July 1st, 2023. That makes perfect sense because, as you all are aware of, the influx of whether it's grant money or tax revenue in terms of what would be part of Lincoln and is in the budget for this year. And you are the municipal entity which is receiving those funds. And the Lincoln Town School District currently does not have the ability to do that. When discussing this matter with Patrick earlier on, the best analogy I can come up for you, although it's not a perfect analogy, is Lincoln is in effect designated, in a sense, designated MAUSD at this point. It has the effect of looking like MAUSD has been designated as their school, and their students are being tuitioned, and their payments are the revenue that you're getting. As I said, it's not a perfect analogy, but tuitioning schools do not sit on the boards of the schools that they tuition their students to. I know that my answer is not necessarily a welcome answer, because I think that there has been outside of the legal realm of me giving you this answer, I think there's been a concerted effort to remain welcoming to Lincoln. I appreciate that. I just don't see that legally that's what your relationship is at this point in time for having representation from the Lincoln Town on your board. And I don't know if there are any questions about that.
Of course, I'll have a question, Dina.
I knew you would, Sam.
I have a question. One is, I haven't recently looked at the certification. I remember looking at it back in near May and then the documents later, so I don't have the language in front of me. But does it make any difference that like Lincoln became sort of its own entity, like sort of for all the grades? Because if I remember, like the certification was like K through 12. Is that part of this analysis versus, it wasn't like it became separate as a K through 6? And then therefore it's then tuitioning out what it doesn't have from like, because I don't know, even as it's currently indicated that it, do you know what I'm saying? I feel like there was some interesting gray area. I thought it was interesting we were K through 12, not K through 6. What does that mean in this interesting, strange transitional time, right? Where we're sort of like a lame duck. I see it more like a lame duck kind of thing. Like we know that we've elected a new president, but until the term actually expires, there's still governance places, even though we know that we voted that that is going to be what happens. It's and I realized the May 18th was a little unusual, but I see that more as the effort to stay in the old law and stay grandfathered before the law changed. Do you see what I'm saying? As opposed less about sort of this sort of lame duck governance. And so that's how I was sort of looking at it without, of course, looking at any precedent or law. Because I can see that there will be certain decisions that may not be appropriate for a Lincoln. I was open to hear that, you know, for a Lincoln rep for future, like I saw people talk about budgeting, right? When you budget for 23, 24, you know, it's not really part of, Lincoln's not part of that process, right? But I could see, for example, an executive session being needed where, you know, you need the board to make a decision that we do when we have our executive sessions for like discipline and things like that, where it might be appropriate to still, I mean, our students are still, you know, going there under the structure that we had set up. And so is there a role there? And I'm sure the next topic we have that you may be here to discuss is also, it is a weird thing with the exit agreement, right? I'm reminded repeatedly through this process as part of MAUSD that even though I'm a Lincoln representative, it is my job to look at all the students in the district and all the towns, right? Which I try to take very seriously in balancing any of the decisions I make. So whether you're from New Haven, you should be considering Lincoln interests. Whether you're from Starksboro, you need to look at Moncton. Like we're supposed to have that. It's not quite like constituency, like the legislature, right? At least that's what's been sort of told to me about our role as a district board member. So again, I see these areas where this is a difficult, unprecedented sort of separation, right? And so that's why I thought of it more that way. And again, I don't know eventually what those things could be, but I could see that something could happen in January where all of a sudden, oh wow, you know, maybe it would have been appropriate to have a say, but it's hard to predict at this point. It's harder from my perspective to predict when that would be.
So there's a lot to unpack in what you said and talked about. Part of this, one is that Lincoln has been removed and it's its own municipality effective May 18th. That's responsible for pre-K through 12. Okay, so you're going back to the old town school district structure, and that's what Lincoln has. It is absolutely, I would say, an interesting issue. Part of it is driven a large part by, and I make no judgment on this, but by the decision of the people of Lincoln to operate under the previous statute. Right, and to advocate in front of the state board that on May 18th that decision be made. Right. I agree with you there. I agree with you about what you put out about being, if you're a representative to the MAUSD board, that you not only come from your town, but that you have a responsibility to the district as a whole. I don't disagree with that, except for the fact that Lincoln is not part of that district as of May 18th. And it is based on a certain situation, it is the lack of a corollary action being taken by the state board on May 18th of addressing MAUSD and because of taking one step, not two steps. I think they did that mindfully because I think they are demonstrating that they're struggling with how to respond, right, to what the townspeople of Lincoln have advocated and voted for. I think there may be some. I think there'll be some resolution about some of the concerns moving forward after the September State Board of Ed meeting. Because if they have to make a decision, they're gonna make a decision, is at least my understanding, they're gonna have that conversation and then decision of where, how Lincoln is gonna be impacted by their decision, right? So if Lincoln's gonna be its own supervisory district, whether or not Lincoln is going to be under the authority of the State Board of Ed, put into an existing multi-district SU, or whether or not the state board is going to modify MAUSD's structure and keep Lincoln where Lincoln is. The state board has, I think, consistently put out at least mid-level that they find that supervisory districts are a preferred structure. So I can't tell you which way they're going to have it, and they wouldn't tell me if they knew at this point either, which way they're going to do it. So there are those issues. I do have the adjustment of membership in the Mount Abraham, the certification order, if you want to see it. I have it up on my screen. I don't think I can share it, just because I can't share, right? I think that's blocked.
To give you that permission, if that seems like that's useful.
Right, and part of this is also, I think also under, is supported, quite frankly, Sandy, from how the Lincoln Town School Board, the current Lincoln Town School Board, has also moved and viewed what's happening with them, right? I think it's supported by the fact that they very clearly asked for the decision to be made on May 18th. I have to assume that they understood the implications of that. It happens to just be one of those quirks of how we do budgets and who has the authority and what is the initial transition board for the Lincoln Town School District, that the money is coming into MAUSD. I think, the same way if you're a tuitioning town, I'm trying to think, if you're Hancock Granville and you're tuitioning kids, although they do it for all of their kids, but if you're tuitioning kids at the high school level and some of your kids are going to Middlebury, they don't have a right to sit at the table to discuss what curriculum decisions are, right? To make those decisions. They have a right, I think, to go to a board meeting and to express what they think should be provided for their students. So I think they're host disabled participant screen sharing. So Patrick, I don't know how to do this.
I can give you permission to screen share. I just didn't know if there was a decision that was.
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't know if you want to see it. I know also that, there's a document that AOE has put out that I guess that they're in agreement that the town of Lincoln School Board can utilize to explain as they move forward in their process to different entities what's going on with them. And that document itself talks about the fact that the town of Lincoln School Board doesn't have a right to supervise. I think it said a right to supervisory services, and also lays it out a little bit different. Let me see if I can find that. I have that one. It's not that one. It talks about under 4D, I think it's 4D, the Lincoln School District shall not be entitled to administrative or other services from the MAUSD as a supervisory district until such time as the state board makes a determination of supervisory union boundaries. That's the corollary decision that they didn't make on May 18th. In connection with the provision of supervisory union services to the Lincoln School District. That's where they're inviting Lincoln and other interested parties to go to the September 2022 meeting to discuss whether or not Lincoln is going to, they say at which meeting it will be decided whether to assign the Lincoln School District to the existing multi-district SU, create a new SU that includes the Lincoln School District and one or more other town school districts and or union school districts, and or designate Lincoln School District as a supervisory district on its own in order to provide its own supervisory services. So I think there's a recognition by the state board that they didn't take that that second step.
Mhm.
It's unfortunate, but it's good, right? I mean, they needed to give Lincoln time to figure out where Lincoln thinks it's advocating that it wants to be in, right? Where it wants to wind up as of July 1st, 2023. And it didn't mess with MAUSD as a whole, because I think, there's some basis to respect having some stability moving forward. I think we'll figure out in September what happens. But I think it's very clear that, that there is that separation.
Krista has a question, and then we have Sarah here with one.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Dina, I don't know if this is for you or Patrick or Don, but I guess I'm just wondering if we can be reminded, maybe you said this at the top of this item, Don, but just why we need to figure this out. I mean, it was my understanding that the main reason is because we have a vacancy that we need to decide whether or not to fill in the Lincoln. And so that we need to decide, is that to be filled, or do we reapportion the configuration of our members? Is that right?
That is part of it, and I can answer it. I think that was something that precipitated to make sure that I came and talked to you tonight about it. But you do have the overarching issue of how are you moving forward as a board, because things like, do you have a quorum count, right? You have to contemplate that, things like, and Sandy as a representative from Lincoln, does she get to vote on things? So those all have to be resolved as well. But yes, you're correct. And what I am saying is, in terms of filling your vacancies that you have under your current articles of agreement that exist for MAUSD, you need to do the reapportionment of your board member allocation. That does not include Lincoln.
Sarah.
My question was about that, and also about the one seat or both seats, like what we're referring to.
So
It would be, you have 2 seats from Lincoln. You had 2 seats from Lincoln on the MAUSD board. And you have how the structure is laid out under your articles of agreement of how many overall board members you're going to have on your board. And that includes those 2, is my recollection. So you would be reapportioning the 2 seats.
There was a formula that was a part of the articles of agreement that explained how you reapportion. So
I'm assuming, Patrick, it's a weighted, right?
It's not a weighted, like each vote is not weighted.
Okay.
It's essentially what the 2 seats would be. 1 seat would go to Starksboro, 1 to Moncton is how the math works out.
Okay.
Based on the 2020 census.
Okay.
So that would be what looks like the reapportionment based on the calculations.
So we need to take action on that piece. We need to get the word out. And that the New Haven seat would just follow the rules already in place that we have to follow to fill a vacancy, but we'd have to change our sort of course for Moncton and stuff.
And to me, that's part of the sense of urgency, I think, is in getting an answer to the question of, does Lincoln have representation on MAUSD or not? If yes, then we fill those positions and we get them in their seats. If not, the longer we continue forward, if there isn't a place for Lincoln at the MAUSD board table, the longer we're going with the inaccurate representation of the towns that are part of MAUSD. So one could argue that for a little while now, Starksboro and Moncton have been underrepresented, given the answer that we're getting from Dina about whether or not Lincoln reps are part of the MAUSD board now. So there is that sort of governance perspective as well.
There's also the statutory responsibility. There's a time frame in terms of getting new board members into. So you do have all of that.
That starts tonight. That was part of the urgency with the vote tonight to accept Rob's resignation from Lincoln. The clock starts ticking on your responsibility to fill that seat if that seat is to be filled.
Is there a statutory limit to reapportionment?
Dina, is there a statutory requirement or guidelines around reapportionment?
You're talking about timelines, Steve?
Timeline?
No, but I would tell you, I think you have an obligation to try and fill the seat in the next 30 days. So I think you should be doing something relatively quickly. I think there could be some understanding that you have to figure out. I don't know when your next meeting is. I'm assuming it is in September.
Right.
I think you should be, I think you can simultaneously, if you have an informal understanding that where those seats are going to be allocated, I think that you can do an informal, hey, if there's anybody who's interested, and put that out there. In other words, you can put it out, I think you said what, Moncton, and you can do it clearly for New Haven right now. You have a resignation for New Haven, which is going to stay with how, as a representative who has to reside in New Haven.
And that's action that our clerk actually takes. The clerk of the board actually does it. It's not something we as a board have to do. The clerk has the authority to do that.
Right.
Okay.
So I think you'd sort of do it simultaneously and put it out there. But you should be doing your reapportionment as soon as feasible.
Sarah, do you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, so this is a discussion item this evening. Is it our action item or is this actually like not something we need to act on? We're just gonna, that's the law and that's what we're doing. Or do we need to act?
So I was of the opinion, the legal opinion, that it is by virtue of the operation of law that Lincoln doesn't have representatives as of May 18th. So that's not something that your board has to take action on.
Oh, right.
So that was mine, although Sandy has a question, so I don't, but that was what my view was. That is the legal effect of what that order is.
Sure. And, you know, it's kind of ironic because, you know, I'm sitting on the board and I'm not going to necessarily go against the tide of the law, but I'm still at work. So that gives you a sign of like how busy things are for me. So, but one of the things, I have the certification, it's just that one page certification of the language. I was able to find it because I had a copy.
Mm-hmm.
When it did the reapportionment, it says specifically membership in Mount Abe Unified District is adjusted and the district is responsible for the education of pre-K through 12 for students residing in Bristol, Moncton, New Haven, and Starksboro. So when it did the adjustment, it did it in the language of saying you're responsible for these towns, right? But then it says, provided, however, that Mount Abe Unified District is responsible for the education of students in Lincoln until July 1, 2023. So I thought to myself, well, it sounds like they're saying it's just Bristol, Moncton, New Haven, and Starksboro, and they're adjusting it because they're responsible for those 4 towns. But then it adds, but of course, then you're responsible till July 1, 2023 for Lincoln, which means to say you're adjusted, you still have Lincoln too, but only to 2023. So if that's the language that justifies the adjustment that you're indicating in the language of responsible, it uses the same language for the other 4 towns, and then the same language just for Lincoln until July 1, 2023. So I think that's interesting because, again, even if you go back to the declaration saying, you know, now we have a new district, it also says that Lincoln only assumes sole responsibility on July 1 of 2023, leaving again this gap of what happens in this lame duck period. So I actually would argue, Dina, that the language of adjustment doesn't actually clarify. It actually confuses.
So if you look at number 3, the State Board of Education declared that the Mount Abraham Unified School District shall continue to exist.
Yep, I see that in the statute, yeah.
Despite the withdrawal of Lincoln. So Lincoln is not part of the Mount Abraham Unified School District. If you look at number 3.
So I was reading the statute, which says that. So it says the state board may declare the Unified Union School District dissolved as of July 1 immediately following or soon after thereafter as each remaining town's or city's obligations have been satisfied. Or it may declare that the unified district shall continue to exist despite the withdrawal of the former town or city member.
Right, and so the effect of a withdrawal is you're not part of the school board or the school district. That's what I'm saying to you. So number 3 of the adjustment issue clearly lays that out. You can't have both, unfortunately. And I understand, and I understand the desire. You could have, and it's a little hard because Vermont has some really incorporated school districts. I deal with one of those, or we do some really funky things. You could have a supervisory union that had MAUSD and the town of Lincoln having its school board and an SU board, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
They didn't do that step. And I think they purposefully didn't do it because they were going, well, one in May, I think that they were a little confused. They were not sure of all the answers from the state board of what the implications were of what they were being asked to do, perhaps, I don't know. Or they did, and they wanted to maybe take it in increments. I can't represent what their viewpoint was on that, but the number 3 on the adjustment of membership in the MAUSD, and the fact that they say that it exists despite the withdrawal of Lincoln. When you withdraw, you're not there.
Yeah.
There's some interesting, I can explain, you have a member where it's Woodstock. So I'm going to mess it up. It's Pittsfield is a tuitioning only town. And so they are out on they have their own little school district, a non-operating school district. And Windsor Central has a unified union school district, but they also have an SU board. The same happens for where, I can't remember specifically, it's the name of it, but it's where the town of Johnson is, because I think there's one town that voted not to ever merge, like 3 times said we're not merging. And so they have in that one, actually, what used to be a modified unified union school district, and then they have an SU, and so they have representation on the SU board. They don't have representation on the unified union boards.
Oh, okay.
So that's what I'm saying. But what the State Board of Ed didn't do is say, we're going to tell you MAUSD that you're now going to be we're going to create an SU and put Lincoln in your SU with you.
Got it. Okay. Well, so at this point, I'm fine. I got it's nothing personal. I totally appreciate Dina and the board really looking carefully at the issue, because it does really help provide clarity. Because honestly, I was I have no idea. I have no idea what my role is. So, that's never helpful either. So.
Right. And I appreciate that. And I want to be very clear is that I don't think this is actually, something that anybody from the other towns are happy about, because I think that they still want to have that collaborative, open engagement. And so I want to be very clear that this is me saying that this is a legal opinion of what the impact is of what Lincoln has done. It's not said to be punitive by any stretch of the imagination. It is just, that is the impact of where we're at legally. And I actually think your fellow board members, if they sense that I would bend in any way, shape, or form, they would try and bend it so that there was still some sort of engagement. That's just sort of my sense of you guys.
It's not a problem. And, Lincoln is prepared to do what they need to be doing. I went to our local Lincoln School Board meeting, which was actually very delightful. It was a wonderful, well-attended, meeting last week.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me wonder about the role, but I think that, I think it's okay. But, without bad feelings. It's just people having different ways of doing things. So
Yep, absolutely.
Not worried about that. Great. Thanks, Dina.
Yep. I don't know if there are any other questions, Pat. I can't really you know, you would think after 2.5 years of doing Zoom meetings, I'd understand this process.
Yeah.
So could you go over next steps again then?
So next steps is, as I understand it, we're gonna go ahead, the clerk will advertise a vacancy as we have done in the past, and we will have collaboration with the New Haven Select Board out, get in contact with them if we have candidates to see if they want to join us or how they want to handle it, and then we would still follow that same path of appointing for New Haven. The added seats would then be, at the same time, need to be advertised in Moncton and Starksboro, according to the Articles Agreement language and that say that we are adding seats. And then they would have that time frame to respond all in that 30 days, right, Dina? The same 30 days.
And then your board would take action in your September meeting to apportion those seats to them, and also who you're going to appoint.
And that would be again in conjunction with the town select boards. So one of our meetings will have to carve out time for that.
Yeah, I
Sarah?
think you do where you have that they don't pick, but you have a conversation, right? Yeah.
Just to clarify, all of these seats are through March,
The seats would be
filled through March till they're
to the
elected.
next, to the next vote. Well, would it be
Yes.
November? Well, we're voting in November, so. would
You
that-
could do it until you could do it in November. It's late, so can you give me time tomorrow to process a little bit more on that? But you could be doing it. The longest it would be sitting is until March.
The seat is a position that usually has a start date that's in March. So that's why I'm curious just to
What
put them all
class-
into the same frame.
What class would they would stay in the same
Because
class, right?
our terms alternate, so not everybody leaves at once, so we'd have to get into that rotation so that they move at, they come and go at it. Because now we all have 3-year terms and we didn't start out that way. We started out at twos
You had
and
some
threes.
twos, you had some ones, and you had some threes.
Yeah, so
I think what we would need to do is look at what are the seats being sort of vacated by Lincoln?
Yep, and
And
then
when are those terms up? And then we have to figure out, one of those goes to Starksboro and one of those goes to Moncton. We'll have to figure out which one goes where. And that will be driven by when the terms end for the other seats in those towns. So we'll have to do a little bit of homework to pinpoint that.
And the New Haven one is just finishing out through March, like the other.
So
ones
I
have
think the
been.
way the language reads is until the next sort of warned election or something like that. So that could be November, I think, to Dina's point, or it could be March.
You can do it in a special meeting or you can do it in an annual. But I would need to talk, we'd need to look at what the terms are, and also talk about whether or not it makes sense. It very well may make sense to do November to March, and then if there's remaining time on the term, that there's an election in March as well for the remainder of that term. So we can talk about that, but it's like 8:45, and so I would prefer to be able to be looking at both the articles of agreement and the statute at the same time to give you that answer.
We can bring a recommendation to probably the next meeting, I guess.
All right. Okay. Next discussion item was about extending an invitation to Lincoln to rejoin MAUSD. Again, another conversation we started at the retreat.
And so I guess if I'm remembering the context of this, one of the questions that surfaced is sort of what options exist for Lincoln, given where they are in the process and what's happening with Ripton and Starksboro, sort of in that context. We talked about the potential for Lincoln to choose to vote on the merger, and then if the merger happens and Lincoln votes in favor of joining and all that, then that's an option for Lincoln to join the newly formed district. Gina went through the other options in terms of Lincoln in an SU, that already exists, Lincoln and an SU with us, or Lincoln on their own as their own supervisory district. And then one of the other options that I learned of in talking with the AOE is a series of steps that could be taken, either initiated by MAUSD or initiated by Lincoln, where if Lincoln initiates it, the Lincoln board could decide that joining MAUSD or the newly merged district was in their best interest, not merging, but sort of being absorbed by essentially either MAUSD or the new district. If they thought that was in their best interest, they could petition the state board essentially to get permission to advance that to a vote of the electorate in Lincoln. If the electorate in Lincoln votes that that is what they wanted to do, the electorate in MAUSD or the new district would vote to accept them in. And if all of that happens, then they sort of join that district. So, and then again, MAUSD could initiate that, and then MAUSD gets permission from the board, and MAUSD then holds a vote in its electorate. And then if all that is in favor, Lincoln gets to go. So quite a series of actions that would lead to that. Where that took the board at the retreat was, what does the board think about extending an invitation to Lincoln saying we are interested in you being a part of us still, and putting that out there, I guess, is where the board went with that.
So then, of course, there's the timing of thinking about that. Lincoln has already sort of made one statement, I guess, that they didn't want to be advisory to the merger. Correct. So it seems a little odd to ask them to rejoin MAUSD before either the state board decides to redraw boundaries or we have a merger. But it might make some sense to extend that invitation after all that goes over. The state board doesn't force Lincoln into something or force us into something ahead of time. If the merger, let's just say, for instance, the merger doesn't go through, then it would seem at that point to make some sense to extend an invitation. Because at that point, there would be a clearer path for everybody going forward. Likewise, if the merger does go through. But up until the point where either the state board says something or the merger vote is taking place, I'm not sure what we say means a whole lot, other than just like.
Sarah. I agree with Steve. I think the timing right now is awkward and not effective, and that, but I think it would be nice to be on the record to say, if you are ever interested, we're happy to talk about it, because we'd love to have you back. So I think if the sentiment is out there, I feel like us initiating it also isn't going through all of the steps isn't that helpful, if that isn't what they want. So at this point, I think we should wait and see.
I mean, it might be more useful as a statement of sentiment rather than as an invitation.
Agreed.
Because an invitation means you want a response. And
Right.
I'm not sure there really is a response until things clear up. But we might make a resolution.
I guess I'm wondering if, and just that statement of like, be open to discussion or, you know, that kind of thing would affect the state board's redrawing and thinking about any of that stuff, or kind of like moving in a certain direction, or maybe we have no idea. But putting that out there as in like, hey, we really want to stabilize our region. We're willing to bring Lincoln back in if that's something they're interested in. And I'm just saying that out loud is helpful
To a
to,
supervisory district.
right. Exactly. But I don't know if that's helpful to other groups other than Lincoln Community School.
So it's an interesting thought, Bailey. I hadn't really considered that point of view, because my point of view, we made a statement, I don't know if we changed our mind that we want to remain a supervisory district. So if we send out an overture and the state board takes that as innuendo that, well, we will take them back and become a school. I don't think that's in our best interest.
No.
In any stretch of the imagination. My original question is that at the last merger study committee meeting, there was a statement made that Lincoln has to vote because they're identified as a advisory. Have we determined if that's so or not?
We have, yes. I've been working with Dina on that, and she's done some homework, and her opinion is that Lincoln does not have to vote. Lincoln has the option to vote on the merger. One other piece, sort of related to sort of a governance conversation, and what's the state board going to do at the August 12th, I think it was, state board meeting, there was a reference made to an interest in the state board in having a meeting in Addison County in person. That has started to take shape. So September 28th, the state board is going to be meeting here at Mount Abe. I'm still working on where at Mount Abe. Looks like probably the auditorium. And that it's unclear to me if that's in addition to their posted September 21st meeting, or if it's in place of. I don't know if that's the meeting where the decision about supervisory union boundaries is going to happen or not. They're also going to be visiting other schools that day. I know they're planning to visit Lincoln in the morning. There may be other schools in Addison County they're looking at also in the morning. All I know is Lincoln sometime in the morning for half an hour or 45 minutes. And then Mount Abe is the meeting from 1 to 5, basically. So something to just make note of. We did offer to feed them if they want to come and have lunch here before the 1 o'clock meeting and give them a tour of the building and show them the construction project. And we want to speak on some of that. They're still working out all those details, but
It sounds like it may be a good idea to just hold on this. I know we're trying to be better about finishing work, but this might be a good thing to hold on at this point.
It's very important.
Yeah.
All right. So we are in need of an executive session, Title I, VSA 5, 313A1A contracts, specifically the Lincoln exit agreement. So we'll need to invite Floyd and Patrick and Dina to join that conversation.
do you want to take public comment first, as we've done sometimes in the past?
Yep, we can take public comment now, and then, because we'll just come back and do our meeting evaluation and adjourn after there'll be no action. So at this time, is there any public comment?
I'm public. I'm no longer board member, apparently.
Sandy.
Thank you. So just to be clear, I totally get it from Dina. I'm looking at the information, which is helpful. I could have been working sooner if we'd done this first on the agenda, Dawn. But I was glad to hear all the input. I really do think, I want to just say that I think the MAUSD board, when I joined, was really challenged to really reach out to the community just to figure out a solution. I want to mirror what Krista said before, that I really feel like people really were trying to reach out. I really do think there's been incredible work that's been done with Nate Levinson in consultation. I think that report is a really good document to work from. I was not at the retreat because I had a hearing all day and I couldn't be there last week, but it does sound like there was additional really positive information that's a good guideline for the board, moving forward. I actually think that a lot of positive things can happen. I don't have any bad feelings in the sense overall from Lincoln's move in its direction. It's a very committed community to making sure that it has the governance of its school without the necessarily the larger governance body with concerns of closure and everything that goes with that in politics. So, you know, I think things happen for a reason. I think people should continue to really try to be balanced in looking at all the perspectives when looking at things, not to bring judgment into it, as more that I think people are really trying to do what they believe is best. And we just don't always agree. And hence why we have this democratic process. So I think that's a good process. I think it's been followed. I think people are trying very hard from all ends. And I'm hoping, regardless of whatever happens in the future, that people will continue to extend olive branches out to people, not to take actions of some as necessarily actions of all, right? That there's always both sides to every story. And then in the end, we vote on it and we move forward with what we have. So I think it's always important to keep the dialogue open from both sides. But I do think that I have confidence that people in our district, MAUSD, as well as Lincoln, in this 5-town area are committed to their students all around. And I have a lot of faith that people will continue to work very hard towards that end. So with that, I bid adieu to the board. I guess I'm done, other than as a public person.
Sandy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy.
Good night, guys.
Thank you, Sandy. Good night.
Good night.
Any other public comment at this time? All right. So I need a motion to go into executive session under Title I, VSA 5, 313A1A contracts and invite Floyd, Patrick, and Dina. Steve? Second. Chris? All right, all those in favor of going into executive session at 9:01, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
It's Dawn, there is a hand up from Ms. Oldham.
Jennifer? Jennifer?
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I got my buttons all mixed up. So I just wanted to make sure, since you're going to into executive session about the exit agreement, that you sort of have the most up-to-date information, because we got behind in our correspondence, and I got a email back from Dina this afternoon that I wasn't able to respond to, but I just want to make sure that you know that we are not asking for the 14% in terms of the capital reserves or the ESSER funds. I think that was particularly, you know, the agreement was after that we would come back and look at another number, and we have proposed another number, and it certainly wasn't accurate on the ESSER funds. And that the proposal that Dina came back with to us is also not something that we're willing to accept. So again, since I know this is a short time frame, and I think
Is this like contract negotiation or not?
Not making any comments at this time.
yeah, no, I'm just updating you on where we are. Just so that since I know you all, I think this is the first time you've had a chance to look at it, that you're have the most up-to-date information from us. And I think that we're wherever it was left off with the correspondence that we had, that I had from Dina, there's another correspondence coming back, which I wish you had now, but you don't. But I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you. We're going to end this meeting, and then Krista and Liz, you should have a link in your email